We're still in Pompeii. We'll be looking, except last time we looked at the civil architecture, the forum, and today we'll be looking at domestic architecture, which is very important. Well, here we are. You've seen this image. This is Pompeii before the eruption of Vesuvius. This is after. And of course, my favorite image is the comparison of Antigua in Guatemala today, with its own volcano, with the original Pompeii, which is indistinguishable, essentially. Except to Antigua, one can today go and walk around and enjoy the city, of course. Well, one can go to Pompeii and enjoy the city in a very different, in a very different way. It was destroyed, you remember, in sometime between August and October of the year 79 Anno Domini. And we also saw these remarkable plaster casts that were obtained from the excavations that represent citizens as they died and in the positions as they died. And again, you saw the forum. There's the temple of Jupiter, the forum around. Just a street in a busy town. The houses, well, the Pompeii was quite congested, and in fact they did have apartment buildings, as you see here. The house could in fact be two-story. In Rome, in fact, there could be three-story, four-story, and divided into apartment buildings, or into apartments, or just rooms for people to rent. Needless to say, those who were wealthy had their own homes, and that's what we'll be looking at today, because they're quite remarkable, those homes. Meanwhile, the city just lived on. There's this archaeology illustrated site online, which is delightful. The man who runs it is a painter and tries to recreate the ancient sites as possibly they were, and in fact gives life to them, which is very interesting. So here is Pompeii. This is a bakery. What you see here is a phallic symbol, which is seen everywhere in Pompeii, because that is the sign of good luck. In fact, today many denizens of the Mediterranean, Italy, Spain, Greece, may wear a golden horn on the chain around the neck, which is essentially the same thing and stems from the same beliefs. And it says here, happiness lives here, and indeed, as you see, it does. The city was plentiful. The city had food and the sea to swim in and to bathe. It was a prosperous, lovely city. People would meet on the corners. Plenty of shops were open to the streets, so that one could just go and have a bit to eat, something to drink, talk to one's neighbors, talk to travelers. They also had public latrines, and it may look unusual, but this actually was a rather civilized thing. There was a body of water that ran underneath the seats, taking away the waste, and then in front, from what we see in this illustration, there are these basins with water, which presumably was changed on a regular basis, and these sponges that they hold in their hands, presumably they brought them with them, because it's hard to imagine using the same sponge for different people, but then who knows. Well, here they are, and in fact going to the bathroom was a social thing. So as you see, one could just sit there, chat, do what must be done, and then go on minding one's life. And now we come to the houses themselves. The original Roman house, the so-called Domus Italica, was most probably Etruscan in origin. Because in fact, when we think of Etruscan tombs, if you remember the tomb of shields and chairs with its plan, it pretty much corresponds to the plan of the Domus Italica, just the original house. It has an entrance right there, and then on each side of the entrance there are two rooms, and these rooms could either have entrances, doors to the outside and be rented as shops, or on the inside and be used by the family. And then one walks directly into the atrium. In the middle of the atrium is a little basin called impluvium, because the roof, as you see here above it, is built in such a way, with an opening in the middle, that the rainwater, when it does rain, could in fact go into the impluvium, and then underneath there was piping that conducted water into cisterns, so that the family could use the water in draft. So these are all rooms here, and then as you see, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then these rooms here don't have the doors. It looked as an extension, so the whole thing looked like a T, like a letter T, just for the use of the family. Then at the very end of the house there would be a tablinum, something that had tables, an office of a master of the house, right there, and then a kitchen garden, or a garden, some place where one could relax and just breathe some fresh air. So this is the original house. The habits of the Romans as they evolved was that a wealthy person would be a patron to people less wealthy, so they would be his clients, and the clients would habitually come to his house to greet him in the morning. Those who wished to discuss business would be allowed into the atrium, and then the business would be discussed in the tablinum. Also, these clients were expected to accompany the man when he went somewhere in business. They also, of course, were expected to vote for him when he stood for public office, and he in turn was meant to protect them and help them in time of need. So this system of patronage will develop in Rome and will be very much part of a social structure. Now, as the Romans became wealthier, and as they encountered Greek civilization, and that will happen in the 3rd century, and they encountered and saw the Greek way of living, they wished to emulate it. So this original Domus Italica was now extended. It was extended with the so-called Greek additions, and particularly the peristyle garden. So instead of having just a kitchen garden or just a little space, now there was an actual peristyle, and then there were no ends to augmenting it. I mean, you could, as long as you had space and as long as you had money, you could build the 2nd floor. You can go to the sides and you'll see it. And of course, the wealthier the person is, the more magnificent the house. And because life, as I said, was well, obviously it's different from the way we live. They didn't have offices to go to. The home was also the office. And particularly as it developed, there were the official part of the house where the paterfamilias, where the master of the house would conduct his business, and then there were private parts of the house. And it was very important where, say, a client or a guest was allowed. And one knew one's place in the Roman hierarchy by whether one wasn't allowed any further than the atrium, or then invited to to the tablinum or even into the further atrium. So it very much depended, and on one's place in the Roman hierarchy. Yes.
I mean, it's not dissimilar from the way we live in the sense that
someone
comes in. So if there's a person who just sort of a traveling salesman who, can I tell you about this thing that I am trying to tell you about, and you won't let them pass the front door, or you will, depending on whether or not you're interested in their message.
Right.
Then
exactly.
You've got your dinner friends whom you allow into your dining room and your living room.
Yeah.
And then you have your best friend, your buddy, who can come hang out with you in your bedroom while
and stay overnight.
While you're sorting clothes, and you can gossip and
no, that's true.
It's not this sort of very structured system that makes no sense or is arbitrary. It's exactly the way we think, that the closer someone is to our heart, the more we trust someone, the further into our house we let them.
Definitely, but there it was also the question of hierarchy. So Domus was the house of a familia, upper class Roman urban citizens, because only the wealthy could afford these homes. So here we are again with the original Domus, the Etruscan Domus, presumably. The entrance was called. Now you don't need to remember all these words, all the jargon. But if you wish, here it is. The entrance was the fosses, so like jaws, into which you're invited. And then number two could be tabernae, could be taverns, in other words, or shops. Or if one doesn't wish them to be, then one can just use them for one. One can close off these walls and open the entrance onto the middle. The atrium with the impluvium, and then the tablinum. That's where the tables are. That's the office. And then 6 is the little garden. It's called hortus, which is easy to remember, horticulture. And then a triclinium, say it would be a dining room, where one triclinium comes actually from the 3 couches that lined the walls. So there are 3 triclinium, and then the servants or the slaves would bring the food, and then or entertain. The allies there. This is number 8. These are the spaces that do not have doors. They're just sort of an extension of the atrium. And the 9s are cubiculums. Those are bedrooms. So this is really the module. And from that module, it can just go indefinitely. And indefinitely it went. One of the earliest surviving houses in Pompeii is the so-called house of Sallust, and well, we hope it goes back to the 3rd century BC. Obviously, it had been remodeled as houses are remodeled in our own lifetime. A young family buys a house, and then they get better jobs, and either they just abandon the house and go buy themselves a better one, or they love the house, their children are born there, and they begin to remodel it, to expand it, if there is room to expand, maybe buy a next door house and join them together. I mean, it's the same idea. So this house, as you see, is exactly the model of the early Etruscan house. You can see the hortus in the background, the little garden, and then this is the impluvium. On each side here, these are bedrooms, the cubiculums, and then those are the same spaces on each side, the alae, and these are just the variations on the Doric column. And as you see, the garden is not a very large garden. So this house of Sallust is essentially this. You're looking at it. You walk in, there were 2 shops on each side, 4 bedrooms, 2 of these alae, and then the tablinum and the garden. And that's so tablinum would essentially be here. It would be separated by movable doors or screens or whatever. I mean, these were gorgeous houses. What we have to remember is that, and I think I mentioned it before, that the ancients loved color. They did not like minimalism. And color was everywhere, decoration, painting. So I'll show you some of the imagined houses, but they really were very, very beautiful.
There's
Now,
an interesting theory about how the harder life was, the more there was the need to beautify one's
Of course.
dwelling, and how the easier life has become, the less need there is to beautify one's dwelling, and the more there is sort of one expresses oneself however one pleases,
Yeah.
whether it's with minimalism or not. But that wasn't really an option when one's outside was terrible. You needed to make the inside warm because you didn't have central heating.
yeah, I know. This is a case in point, for instance, is the house of the Vetti. And the Vetti were two brothers who were freedmen. They were slaves, they were born slaves, but they did extremely well. They were freed and they did even better. So as a result, as you see, there is no tablinum, because they didn't need an office. They were freed slaves, they did extremely well, but they did not have clients. The older family had clients, but not these two brothers. In fact, they were the ones who went to visit their patrons, as opposed to somebody coming to visit them. But they nevertheless had quite a bit of money, and as a result, they constructed this beautiful house. The old Etruscan style you see of the impluvium and the opening in the roof, here confluvium it's called. You walk in here, there is a little entrance, then there is our atrium, and they did have the two alae here, secondary rooms opening to the atrium. They had dining rooms, and as you see, they built on the dining rooms, and then there's a painted room with beautiful frescoes, courtyards, bedrooms, kitchens, and they also had another atrium. They also had a peristyle atrium. This is the recreation of the house, as it may have been, because, as I said, everything was very much in color. And this is the impluvium as you see it, and then there's the atrium, the Greek atrium in the back, and more rooms accordingly. So that's the house of the Vetti, and this is the peristyle of the house of the Vetti. The biggest house in Pompeii was the so-called house of the Faun, and the reason it was called House of the Faun is because, well, today it's a copy, because when it was found, there was a little statue, bronze statue of a satyr, faun. They all have different names.
Satyr is Greek, faun is Roman.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
And in one of the atriums, so it is called the House of the Faun, and it is the biggest house in Pompeii. As you see here, one walks in, but the important thing, there's always this direct access, and direct access really began here. As you walk in, you can see all the way through. I mean, obviously, if there are no curtains, and of course there would be curtains, but basically the design is the architectural design goes around this central axis that leads you from the beginning of the house to the very end of the house. And it's the same thing here. You can see directly into the Greek peristyle, and here, from here, there's the access, and the same thing with the House of the Faun. Now, as I said, this is the largest house in Pompeii because I mean, space was limited. In order for someone to have an even larger house, one had to go away from the very precincts of Pompeii, and we'll look at one of those villas as well, which is a kilometer away from one of the gates. But still, much more space there. Here one enters, here's the main entrance, and here is the main atrium, number 2, but they also had another atrium, number 3 here, because as you see, as the house developed, it took up, in fact, the entire block, the entire insula. It's called insula in Latin. So and they built on and on. So it has another atrium. So if say your clients would be invited to this atrium, this, even though it's a little smaller, number 3, but it was more intimate. So it was more of a family atrium. And it was tetrastyle. Tetrastyle means that the roof, in fact, was supported on 4 columns, which we didn't have originally, because in the original Etruscan home, the roof was slanted and supported on the beams without the columns, whereas this was. Not only it had two atriums, it also had two peristyles. There was one peristyle and there's another peristyle, a much, much larger one. And then one could in fact exit from the other side on the other street. These areas were uniquely designed to provide an optimum view of one specific area. This number 5, and we'll look at it, it's called an Alexander exedra. An exedra is again an architectural element, a way through that one could walk through. And on the floor there was a unique mosaic, which is now in Naples Museum, of the Battle of Alexander against the Persian king Darius, and we'll look at it. So this is the House of the Faun, and again the sort of a recreation of the House of the Faun as it may have been. In fact, you can go online and you can look up the recreation of a Pompeiian house, and there are videos and of course images that people created, and they can take you from room to room and see what they looked like and what the house looked like, and they're very well done, some of them. So here it is, this is our impluvium, but the main axis again is straight through the first peristyle and into the second peristyle. This is what remains of it today, but the plan is there, so with sufficient imagination and preparation beforehand. And also, of course, when you go there, you can purchase a book, the book that recreates the images. So one page would be as it is today in ruins, but then there'll be a transparent page that you can flip over, and then you can see how it fits in the original design. So this is the exedra, the little passage that we looked at, that we saw on the plan, and this is where the mosaic was. And this is the mosaic of Alexander, and I mean the house was just tremendous. It really, I mean, can you imagine walking into a house like this? It's quite spectacular. Here it is again. Underneath that mosaic was a mosaic of life on the Nile, and that is also in the museum in Naples. When it was found, this is what it looked like, and this is the mosaic itself. It is made up, mosaic is made up of tiny little tesserae, and they're tiny little pieces, and there's something like 1.5 million of those tiny little pieces that make up this mosaic. The whole idea of a mosaic again began in Greece, perhaps, and I mean from pebbles really. You put several pebbles together and then you create a design. And then it went on into, and then the tiles were used. It's our tiles. Essentially, it's the same idea as our tiles. It represents the Battle of Issus that was fought between Alexander the Great and King Darius of Persia. It was fought in the year 333 BC, 10 years before Alexander will actually die. And Alexander was victorious in that battle, and Darius escaped. So what you see here now, the conjecture is that this is a copy of a Greek painting, because back in the 5th century, presumably the Greeks very much discovered the secrets of representing a three-dimensional image on a two-dimensional space, and they learned the tricks of a linear perspective, the one-point perspective, of representing light and shade, the cast shadows, the ability to model a figure in space so that it becomes in fact three-dimensional, almost sculptural looking. So all of this, and this may just have been a copy of that painting. Alexander is here on Bucephalus, on his horse, and here's Darius escaping. And as you see, foreshortening is very much here as well. Foreshortening is the ability to paint images at an angle to one's plane of vision, so that it appears foreshortened, but as such three-dimensional, and the horses here especially, you can see that. So it's really a brilliant, brilliant piece of art. There's Alexander who is piercing one of Darius's companions, and the spear goes right through the poor devil, and then Darius, of course, is horrified and sort of reaches out his arm towards him, while everything falls in front of him. Here's one of his companions. You can in fact see his face as reflected in the mirror. I mean in the shield. I mean, all of this is extremely sophisticated techniques of representation, and the fact is that the Romans borrowed so much from Greek, because I mean, the Romans where it came to imagination, beauty, charm, versatility, that wasn't their thing. The Romans, it was practicality, experience, simplicity, endurance. That was Romans, but in terms of artistic imagination, not really. So there's a very good chance that this, in fact, was copied from a Greek painting. Okay, now we go to still another house in Pompeii. We're kind of taking a tour of Pompeii, and this is called the House of the Silver Wedding. It has nothing to do with the wedding of the inhabitants of this house. It was excavated in 1893, and that was the 25th anniversary of Umberto and Margherita of Savoy, which took place in this year, and that's why sort of the discovery of the house was dedicated to the silver wedding of king and queen, and that's why it's called that. What's fascinating here is what I mentioned before in the house of the faun, the tetrastyle. This is what this is. No longer the opening in the roof. You see, no longer the roof is supported by beams. It is supported now by the four beautiful Corinthian columns, and the house, you see, belongs to the mid-2nd century BC. But again, it was, of course, improved later on. So the impluvium now is very safe from the roof collapsing, not that it collapsed before. But so that's what it's called. It's called the tetrastyle atrium, and the family very much liked Corinthian columns and columns in general, because it also has this very interesting kind of unusual solution for a salon, for a little dining room, so to speak. And I mean, it's called the oikos, and it has the barrel-vaulted ceiling, as you see, and then the cornice is supported by, again, four columns, and then it was all decorated in fresco, and we'll talk about the fresco decoration of the houses as well. And here is the house of the silver wedding. So one walk, again, always look, whenever you look at a Roman house, always look for that axis, because it will anchor you. Everything else happens around on each side of that axis, and here's the axis right there. The entrance, the atrium, the tablinum, the peristyle, etc. And then it has a different peristyle on the side, still another. And what it also had, I mean, these people were clearly also quite wealthy, it had its own bath. It had its own swimming pool right here. And the aqueducts that brought the water into the city for public baths and for fountains, well, one could just donate a certain sum to the city and arrange for part of the aqueduct to be redirected towards your house, so that the water would, so your house would be supplied with the constant influx of water, and this house shows that. Still another house, and you know, these names have nothing to do with whether they had these names or not at the time of back in the 1st century AD, because they're just named according to a distinguished feature of the house, as the house of the faun, or house of the silver wedding, or if there's a name in the house, then that would be attached to it, of course. The house of the labyrinth has a very elegant, again, mosaic of a labyrinth in one of the rooms, and that's why it's called the house of the labyrinth. And what this has now inside its triclinium, it actually has a peristyle inside the room itself, as you see. And we'll talk about the decorations. But then the columns, which are presumably Corinthian columns, the columns were erected in such a way as if one stands at a certain spot in the room, the columns would correspond to the painted columns. So, the effect must have been quite magical. That's the one of the labyrinths. This again is a recreation of one of the Pompeian houses, and just to give you an idea what it actually may have looked like. These are various mosaics. This is very charming. It says Cave Canem, and it's a floor mosaic. Usually there's several of them, and they were usually inserted right at the entrance on the floor. It says, "Beware of the dog." And then those houses that had fountains would also have these beautiful mosaics within the fountains. And now we arrive at the decorative styles of these houses. And in the 19th century, a German scholar, August Maul, produced, but still remains, pretty much a basic scheme of the types of decoration. And needless to say, there's since then there have been found variations on the theme, and of course transference from one scheme to another, and the schemes in between. But just as the Pompeian, the main axis of the Pompeian house is really the thing to look for, and then everything else adds to it. Same with this. There are 4 basic styles that he had identified. And then there are various, of course, offshoots of those styles. Now, the style that he felt belonged to the 2nd century BC was the so-called first Pompeian style. The 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. So this is the first Pompeian style. And essentially, it consisted of replicating beautiful stones, because whether they were marbles or malachites or really any lovely stones, and these stones would be brought from Egypt or from Greece, and even marbles could exist, of course, in different colors, and the porphyries. There are endless beautiful stones in the world, but it's extremely expensive to bring it to Rome. But less expensive to replicate it in paint. Today also in our interior design we can hire someone to make our wall look like marble wall, and in different colors. Same thing there, and that's what essentially the first style is. First, the incrustation style. The wall is painted and molded in stucco to imitate masonry blocks. There are no figured scenes. And then beginning with the 1st century BC, about the year 100, through the middle of the century, through the entire century, they developed a completely opposite style, which is the 2nd style. And that style was a figured style. Not only a figured style, but it's also, it incorporated landscapes. It was... it aimed at dissolving a wall. It's at looking at the wall and seeing something else, as if the room is now extended into a garden, or the room is extended into a beautiful cityscape. So that's the 2nd Pompeian style. And then the 3rd, or ornate, the vistas here give way to delicate decorative scheme, concentrating on formal element. And this style, according to Mao, existed from about 15 BC to the middle of the 1st century AD, and it was a very elegant style. It was a very sort of almost innervated style, but very, very, very decorative. And we'll look at them. And then the fourth, which from about the middle of the 1st century BC and until Pompeii was destroyed in 79, was kind of an amalgamation of all the styles, and wherever your fantasy took you, one could do that. We should also remember that in the year 62 there was an earthquake in Pompeii, and much was destroyed then. And then 17 years later, of course, the whole thing was destroyed. But by that time, by 79, there were still works, repair works from 17 years ago going on in Pompeii. This, for instance, we go back to our Samnite house, and this is, I mean, the house itself dates back from the 3rd century, but presumably this particular decoration dates from the 2nd. And so this is what it would be like. Of course, when it was just freshly done, and plaster was molded in a way to resemble masonry, beautiful, different masonry, and this is what it would look like. So as the first Pompeian style. Then actually this house, the House of the Griffins, we're actually back on Rome now, on the Palatine Hill, but it is still called the Pompeian style. This is a good example of a transition from the first to the second, because you see the first Pompeian style everywhere here. However, look what they had done. In front of the wall, the artist now painted Corinthian columns on the basis, and the basis of the columns, you see, project forward visually. This is just visual projection that's done in a linear perspective. But if we look, you can see on the side walls that, of course, that they're not projecting. But if you look at the wall directly, you see them projecting. It's an illusionary sort of thing, and this is the beginning of the second style, because the illusion was becoming important. Both of these examples are from Bostriali, another town around Vesuvius, which also was destroyed by the eruption. And these are in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They have a spectacular classical section, and this is a room, and this one is one of those paintings, and this is your typical perfect second Pompeian style. It's an illusionary style. As you see, it's completely different from the first style. It's as if they were tired now of masonry blocks. They want to open up the vista. I remember actually back in New York in the 90s, in the early 90s, there was this fad of lining one's walls in the apartments with mirrors, and of course that extended the image of the room. So that's what the second Pompeian style does here. And the linear perspective is, as I said, it can also be called a one-point perspective, geometric perspective, mathematical perspective. I may have talked about it before. And just imagine a railroad. A railroad, you stand in the middle of the railroad hoping no train coming from behind, and it recedes into a point, and then everything along the railroad becomes visually smaller, and that's what the linear perspective is. And so this is what's done here. There's a little tholos right here with Corinthian columns, and what you see behind is a beautiful, beautiful peristyle, presumably a peristyle garden. One is sort of invited to walk in because there's an open door with a little wall that one can go around, presumably, and again, Ionic columns are on each side. It's very much a beautiful architectural second style decoration. And just imagine in your homes, your parents' homes, your children's homes, you walk into friends. You walk into a house and you see something like this on the wall. It's really just quite extraordinary, because even the very wealthy homes today do not have these. Well, some of them perhaps do, but very few. I imagine, have these kind of hand-painted frescoes, true frescoes. Here's another second Pompeian style, even though it's not in Pompeii, it's near Rome, and it was in the villa that belonged to Lydia, who was a wife of the first emperor of Rome, Emperor Augustus. And what you see here is a splendid, just splendid garden. And you must imagine that the entire wall was that garden. And there's a fence right there in front of the wall, and then there's a little haha wall that separates the fence from the fence and then the garden. The haha wall that you can step over, and then there are fruit and birds and all sorts of beautiful life. I mean, you can almost smell citrus when you look at it. And interestingly enough, watch this. So this is the wall itself. The whole room was covered in this garden. And here we have Claude Monet's lily pads in France. And again, it's a wraparound image. Did Monet know about? Possibly. We can't tell. But the fact is, it's very striking to see essentially the same imagery, a very similar imagery that comes to us from the end of the 1st century BC, and then in the 19th century or early 20th century when Monet was painting. Now, you remember the fresco that we saw last time in the Pompeian amphitheater? That too is a second style Pompeian fresco. And so now that we've looked at all those, we might as well go a little further from Pompeii. Pompeii is about, as I said, like a kilometer away. This is called the Villa of Mysteries. And the reason it's called the Villa of Mysteries is because of the second style Pompeian frescoes that are there. And now here, clearly, the owners wanted something larger than the House of the Faun, because they wanted beautiful view, they wanted gorgeous gardens, they just wanted everything. They wanted really a very elegant villa, and they decided to build one outside of Pompeii, on the periphery of the city. And this is what the villa looked like. It had this spectacular porch right there, overlooking the Mediterranean. There's the bit of Mediterranean. And it had all this property. This is also from Archaeology Illustrated. So the porch is phenomenal. And then the room with the frescoes of the mysteries, in fact, is that room right there. And we'll look at it. So from that room, one could also see this incredible landscape. This is what it looks like today. This is our porch right there. Because the villa sat on a platform, as you see, it sat on the raised platform, and the platform was done in concrete, and it was done with the barrel vaulting inside, even though outside it was enclosed, and so there was only a suggestion that there's barrel vaulting inside with these blind arches. But that's where it sat, on the very same structure that held up our theater temples that we looked at last time. And so here it is. This is what the villa looks like today. And one enters from the other side. The villa overlooks the Mediterranean, and that's what the view was. The entrance, this is the portico. This is the portico, and this is the terrace. The one entrance here, the axis is still there. Always look for that axis, and there it is. But they changed things around. They had so much space, and by now, so much architects had so much experience. So instead of walking into an atrium, one walked into a peristyle. So one walked here directly into a peristyle with rooms around, of course. Obviously, these were private rooms or whatever rooms, that not private rooms, but family rooms that family used for various purposes, because there wouldn't be shops since no one went there to shop. But one walked into the peristyle, and then one walked into an atrium, and then tablinum, and then the portico, and then the gardens were all around. Then there would be another courtyard with a different portico. I mean, just a very wealthy house with many, many rooms. But there's always that access, and they wanted to be surrounded by greenery, and because in Pompeii, however wealthy you are, I mean, the biggest thing you can do is, yes, to purchase the entire block, to the entire insula as the house of the funds, but you still cannot surround yourself with gardens. Even now, the later houses managed even that. But then the house would be considerably smaller, and then the garden would be bigger. But we'll look at those as well. And we're going to look at this room right there. Here. Oops, not yet. First, this is the atrium. So this is where one walks in. There's the atrium here. And then this is the peristyle. From the atrium, one walks into the peristyle. And this is what it looks like today. And interesting with this peristyle, there's again, this is not a ha-ha wall. This is an ancestor of monastic cloisters, essentially, peristyles. But one clearly wanted the separation between the garden and the walkway around the garden, which most probably was very beautifully decorated with various frescoes. Here, there's that room that I was talking about, the room of the mysteries. It's recreated here, so one would, from the house itself, one would walk into that room, and then outside there would be the portico. We don't know what this means really, because, well, the word mystery means that we're not supposed to know. Mystery is only revealed to someone who is initiated into the mysteries. It looks as if it has something to do with Dionysiac mysteries. Most of them are women in the frescoes, and the cult of Dionysus was very popular in Rome, and around the turn of the millennium. And what those mysteries themselves involved is nothing was written down, because they're mysteries, and so we don't know. But we see that there is a woman that continues around the wall. First she is dressed, then she undresses. The only male figures are, well, presumably Dionysus himself, perhaps and a couple of assistants. And then the figure turns around. I mean, it's a continuous narrative, and there she is, right there, being walloped. It's possible that there were books not revealing what the mysteries are, but there are books of certain designs that an artist may have followed. This was clearly fit to the room itself, because as you go around the room, you follow the progress of that woman from one step to another, to the next, and it skirts the room and turns the corners. So even if these designs were prefabricated, and one copied certain designs, this is individual in terms of fitting this particular room. Here, that's the other corner. Here's the woman herself, and here is the winged woman who is walloping her, and then presumably she now is initiated into the mystery, and is free to be herself, and becomes almost an allegory, because usually these capes, the flowing capes, specify an allegory of sorts, but we don't exactly know. Here it is. Another type of the second style painting, for some reason the travels of Odysseus were very, very popular, because one sees them repeated in different places. This one is from the house on the Esquiline Hill, and this is Odysseus in the underworld. The way it's done here also, not only the second style of the Odysseus himself in the underworld, but also the pilasters right there. It almost looks as if these are they are not really pilasters, but they're square columns that stand in front of the wall and almost reflect in the wall with their shadows there. So all of this illusionary technique is very much in evidence in the second style. Now, the book preferred to treat the third and the fourth style later because it will not appear until just before the destruction of Pompeii, but I might as well show you what they looked like today. So the third has become extremely attenuated, extremely decorative. It's basically the second Pompeian style, but shrunk to the size of a painting or a miniature even. Here, for instance, if I were to show you simply the inside of the wall, right here, you would think that it's the second Pompeian style, and you'd be completely right. But seeing it in the context of the entire wall, you now see that it is a third Pompeian style. They now combine, so there's masonry behind, and then the painting itself the second Pompeian style now becomes a painting rather than the entire wall. Here, it's almost a miniature surrounded by this extremely, this very, very elegant, very decorative, very attenuated little columnettes, really, that in real life obviously couldn't hold anything. When you compare these square columns, you can see that they could hold some weight. These can hold absolutely nothing, but it's very, very beautiful and very lovely. I mean, it's comparable really to the Rococo style of art in the 18th century Europe. But this is the third style. And then the fourth everything is mixed together. Not only everything is mixed together, it's the first and the second and the third, but also often you will see architecture that's not finished, that's cut off on the sides. So when you see something like this, that evolved just before Pompeii was destroyed, and that's the fourth Pompeian style. We did our Pompeii bit, and so you know all about the Pompeian houses.